Harper's Time Travel Odyssey in Viking, Greenland, year 1000. What if you woke up 1,000 years in the past, surrounded by ice and Vikings, with only your modern knowledge to survive? Could you outsmart a brutal world where one wrong move means death? Meet Harper, a 30-year-old American engineer from Seattle, who's about to face the ultimate test of survival in Greenland, 1000 AD. In this gripping tale, you'll discover how her 21st century ingenuity battles ancient dangers, unravel a mystery that could change history, and uncover a secret that might just send her home, or trap her forever. Stick around to see if Harper can rewrite the past, and what shocking twist awaits her. The wind howled like a wounded beast, slicing through the jagged cliffs of Greenland's frozen coast. Harper Collins, a structural engineer from Seattle, blinked against the blinding snow, her breath catching in her throat. One moment, she'd been calibrating a 3D printed bridge model in her sleek downtown office, the hum of computers and coffee machines in the background. The next, a strange, shimmering light had swallowed her whole, spitting her out into this icy nightmare. She was no longer in 2025. The crude wooden longhouses, the stench of smoked fish, and the fur-clad figures staring at her with suspicion told her she'd landed somewhere ancient, somewhere deadly. It was the year 1000, and Harper stood shivering in the heart of a Viking settlement, her high-tech parka and steel-toed boots laughably out of place among the woolen tunics and iron axes. Her phone, now useless without a signal, was tucked in her pocket, a cruel reminder of the world she'd left behind. The Vikings whispered among themselves, their guttural Norse words alien, yet strangely familiar, like echoes of a documentary she'd half-watched on Netflix. One word kept surfacing, Utlendinger, outsider. Harper's heart pounded. She wasn't just an outsider. She was a woman from a millennium away, and every instinct screamed that she didn't belong. The settlement, nestled in a narrow valley between towering glaciers, was a fragile speck of life in a world ruled by ice. Long houses sagged under the weight of snow, their sod roofs crumbling like wet cardboard. Harper's trained eye spotted the flaws immediately. Poor load distribution, no insulation, and foundations that begged to collapse under the next storm. Back in Seattle, she designed skyscrapers to withstand earthquakes. Here, these people were one bad blizzard away from being buried alive. Her mind raced. Could her knowledge save them? Or would it make her a target? The Viking stares grew heavier. A hulking man with a braided beard, his face scarred like a road map, stepped forward. This was Bjorn, the chieftain, whose word was law in this frozen outpost. His eyes narrowed as he barked something Harper couldn't understand, but the spear in his hand spoke clearly. Prove your worth, or die. Beside him, a gaunt figure in a hooded cloak, Ira, the settlement seer, whispered poisonously, her gaze boring into Harper like she could see straight through to her 21st century soul. Harper swallowed hard. She'd faced tough clients before, but never ones who could slit her throat for looking too strange. Her first night was a trial by ice. Huddled in a corner of a smoky longhouse, Harper clutched her parka tighter, the cold seeping into her bones. The villagers argued fiercely about her presence, their voices rising over the crackle of the fire. Some saw her as a gift from the gods, others a curse. Ira's voice cut through the din, sharp and accusing, claiming Harper's arrival heralded doom. Harper didn't need to speak Norse to understand the seer's hostility. She'd seen that look before, in boardrooms where old-school engineers dismissed her ideas. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was survival. As the firelight danced on the walls, Harper's mind churned. She wasn't just a stranger here. She was a woman with knowledge that could change everything. Back in her time, she'd studied Viking architecture in college, crude but clever for its era. These longhouses were failing because the builders didn't understand load-bearing dynamics or thermal insulation. Harper did. If she could convince these people to listen, she could build them homes that wouldn't collapse under the relentless Greenland winters. But how do you explain structural engineering to a people who think snow is sent by angry gods? The answer came at dawn, when a sickening crack echoed through the valley. A longhouse on the settlement's edge buckled, its roof caving in under a fresh layer of snow. Screams pierced the air as villagers scrambled to pull a family from the wreckage. Harper didn't hesitate. She ran to the site, barking orders in broken Norse she'd pieced together from half-remembered history lessons. Clear the debris. Prop the beams, she shouted, gesturing wildly. The villagers, stunned by her confidence, obeyed. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd spent years on construction sites, directing the men to reinforce the remaining structure with scavenged timber. When the dust settled, a child was pulled alive from the rubble, and the villagers' wary glances softened. Bjorn approached, his massive frame looming over her. Through a translator, a wiry boy named Leaf who'd learned a smattering of her language from traders, he demanded to know how she'd known what to do. Harper seized her chance. "I'm an engineer," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I build things that last. Your houses are weak. I can make them strong." She pointed to the collapsed longhouse, then to the sky, where storm clouds gathered like a warning. "If you don't listen, more will fall. And next time, you won't be so lucky." Bjorn's eyes flickered with something new. Curiosity, maybe even respect. But Ira stepped forward, her cloak billowing in the wind. "She speaks with a serpent's tongue," the seer hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Her knowledge is not of this world. She will bring ruin." The crowd murmured, torn between fear and hope. Harper's stomach twisted. She just saved a life, but in this world, being different was a dangerous game. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the glaciers blood red, Harper stood at the edge of the settlement, staring at the endless ice. She was 1,000 years from home, surrounded by people who could turn on her in an instant. Yet something burned inside her, a spark of defiance. She wasn't just going to survive this. She was going to change it. But deep in her gut, a question gnawed. How had she gotten here? Was it an accident? Or was there a purpose to this impossible journey? And what did Ira know that she wasn't saying? Harper stood at the edge of the Viking settlement, her breath fogging in the frigid Greenland air, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and courage. The collapsed longhouse from the day before was a stark reminder of the stakes. These people lived on the knife's edge of survival, and her knowledge was their only hope. But convincing a village of hardened Vikings to trust a stranger, a woman from a world they couldn't fathom, was like trying to explain quantum physics to a wolf. She had to act fast, think faster, and somehow make them see her as more than an Utlandinger. The clock was ticking, and the ice was unforgiving. The morning after the collapse, Harper woke to the sound of axes biting into wood. The villagers were already at work, salvaging what they could from the wreckage. She pulled her parka tight, her Seattle-bought boots crunching through the snow, and approached the worksite. Leaf, the wiry translator with a quick grin, was a lifeline. "They're talking about you," he whispered, his eyes darting to a group of men nearby. "Some say you're a witch. Others think you're sent by Odin." Harper smirked, brushing snow from her hair. "Good. Let them think I'm a god if it gets them to listen." Her plan was simple but audacious. Build a new longhouse, one that could withstand Greenland's brutal winters. Back in Seattle, she'd studied Viking architecture during a college elective, marveling at its raw ingenuity but noting its flaws. These longhouses relied on sod and timber, with no regard for load distribution or thermal efficiency. Harper knew she could do better. She envisioned a frame of interlocking wooden beams, reinforced with cross-bracing, a design inspired by modern barn structures, but simple enough to build with Viking tools. It would be sturdy, warm, and a middle finger to the ice gods these people feared. She gathered the villagers around a patch of cleared snow, using a stick to sketch her design in the dirt. Leaf translated as she spoke, her voice steady despite the skeptical faces. "Your houses collapse because the weight isn't spread right," she said, pointing to her diagram. "The snow piles up, and the walls buckle. I can build you a frame that holds, like a ship on land." The comparison sparked murmurs of interest. Vikings revered their ships. Bjorn, the chieftain, loomed at the edge of the crowd, his scarred face unreadable. Harper pressed on, her passion igniting. "And we'll pack the walls with moss and clay, nature's insulation. It'll keep you warm, even when the wind screams." The crowd was split. A burly carpenter named Gunnar, his hands calloused from years of axe work, nodded slowly, intrigued by the ship analogy. But others weren't convinced. A woman with braided hair, Astrid, spat into the snow. "Why trust her? She wears strange furs and speaks of things we don't know. She mocks our ways." Harper's stomach twisted, but she kept her cool. Then came the moment that broke the tension. Pointing to the snow piling up around them, she grinned and said, "This stuff? It's just cold concrete. We'll use it to our advantage." Leaf's translation faltered, and the villagers burst into laughter, the phrase cold concrete sounding absurd in their tongue. For a moment, Harper wasn't an outsider, she was human. Bjorn raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "You have 3 days," he said through Leaf, his voice like gravel. "Build this ship house. If it stands, you stay. If it falls, you leave, or worse." Harper nodded, her heart pounding. 3 days to build a longhouse from scratch, with no power tools, no blueprints, just her brain and a village of doubters. Game on. The work began at dawn. Harper threw herself into the task, her engineer's mind firing on all cylinders. She directed Gunnar and a team of men to fell trees from a nearby pine grove, selecting the straightest trunks for beams. She taught them to notch the wood for interlocking joints, a technique she'd seen in modern timber frame construction. The villagers watched, half curious, half suspicious, as she measured angles with a makeshift protractor, a flat stone, and a piece of twine. Her confidence was infectious, and soon even Astrid was hauling logs, her grumbling softened by Harper's relentless energy. But trouble brewed. Ira, the seer, lurked at the edges, her hooded figure like a shadow over the worksite. She whispered to the villagers, her words dripping with warnings of curses and betrayed gods. "This woman defies the old ways," she hissed to a group of women weaving baskets. "Her strange magic will anger the frost spirits." Harper overheard, her jaw tightening. She'd dealt with naysayers before, crusty old engineers who scoffed at her designs, but Ira was different. Her influence was spiritual, primal, and dangerous. Harper knew she had to tread carefully, but time was running out. By the second day, the frame was taking shape. The interlocking beams stood tall, a skeletal structure that looked alien against the sagging longhouses nearby. Harper climbed the frame like a spider, checking joints and barking orders. "Tighter. That brace needs to be flush," she shouted, her voice hoarse from the cold. The villagers were starting to believe. Gunnar even cracked a smile when she showed him how to wedge clay into the walls for insulation. But the weather was turning. Dark clouds rolled in from the sea, and the wind carried the bite of an approaching storm. Harper's calculations hadn't accounted for this. Greenland's winters didn't play fair. That night, Ira struck. As Harper slept in the longhouse, exhausted from the day's work, a group of villagers crept to the worksite under the seer's command. They loosened the beams, scattering the carefully packed moss and clay. When Harper woke at dawn, her heart sank. The frame listed to one side, its joints weakened. The villagers gathered, their faces a mix of guilt and fear. Ira stood triumphant, her cloak billowing. "See," she declared, "her work fails because the gods reject her." Harper's fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to call Ira out, but she knew it would only deepen the divide. Instead, she turned to the crowd, her voice calm but fierce. "This isn't the gods," she said, Leaf translating. "This is sabotage, and I'll prove it by rebuilding better." The villagers murmured, some nodding, others glancing nervously at Ira. Bjorn stepped forward, his eyes locked on Harper. "You have 1 day left," he said. "Fix it, or you're gone." Harper nodded, her mind racing. She had 24 hours to rebuild, reinforce, and finish the longhouse before the storm hit. Failure wasn't just exile. It was death for her and the village if the structure collapsed. The final day was chaos. Harper worked like a woman possessed, rallying Gunnar, Leaf, and even Astrid to help. They renotched beams, packed the walls with twice the clay, and used salvaged ship ropes to lash the frame against the wind. Harper's hands bled from splinters. Her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. She taught the villagers to chant as they worked, a rhythm to keep them moving, something she'd learned from construction crews back home. The chant caught on, and for a moment the settlement felt united, their voices rising over the howling wind. As night fell, the longhouse stood complete, its frame solid against the darkening sky. Harper stepped back, her chest heaving, as the first snowflakes of the storm began to fall. The villagers gathered, their eyes wide with hope and doubt. Ira's voice cut through the silence. "It will fall," she said, pointing to the sky. "The frost spirits will crush it and her." Harper met her gaze, unflinching. "Let's see who's stronger," she said, her words a challenge to both Ira and the storm itself. The storm hit like a freight train. Wind screamed through the valley, snow piling against the longhouse's walls. Harper stood inside with the villagers, the air thick with tension. Every creak of the beams made her heart skip, but she trusted her design. She'd calculated the load, reinforced the joints, and packed the walls to trap heat. The longhouse held. Hours passed, the storm raging outside, but the structure stood firm, warm, and dry. The villagers' fear turned to awe. Gunnar clapped Harper on the shoulder, his grin wide. "You built a ship for the land," he said. Even Astrid nodded, her skepticism gone. But Ira wasn't done. As the storm died down, she cornered Harper outside, her eyes blazing. "You think you've won," she whispered. "This world isn't yours. The gods brought you here for a reason, and it's not to play hero." Harper's blood ran cold. Ira knew something about the shimmering light that had brought her here. Before she could press further, Bjorn's voice boomed across the settlement. "Harper," he called. "Come, we have a new challenge for you." The stage was set for a greater test, one that would push Harper's skills and her courage to the limit. Ira's words lingered like a shadow. The gods brought you here for a reason. What did she mean? And could Harper trust her own instincts in a world where knowledge was both her weapon and her curse? The dawn broke over the Greenland settlement with a sky like bruised iron, heavy with the promise of a storm that could bury them all. Harper Collins, the 30-year-old engineer from Seattle, stood before the newly built longhouse, its sturdy frame a testament to her ingenuity. The villagers' cheers from the night before still echoed in her ears, but the victory was short-lived. Bjorn, the towering Viking chieftain, had summoned her at first light, his scarred face grim. Through Leif, the young translator, he delivered an ultimatum that made Harper's blood run colder than the ice around her. "Build us a new village, 5 longhouses, strong as this one, in 5 days. The ice is shifting. Our valley will flood if we stay. Fail, and we leave you to the frost spirits." 5 days. 5 longhouses. A ticking clock against a cataclysmic storm, and a village teetering on the edge of panic. Harper's mind raced, her engineer's instincts clashing with the sheer impossibility of the task. Back in Seattle, she'd overseen projects with cranes and CAD software. Here, she had axes, rope, and a crew of Vikings who half believed she was a witch. Worse, Ira, the seer, watched from the shadows, her cryptic warning. "The gods brought you here for a reason," gnawing at Harper's resolve. Was this her purpose? Or was it a trap? The stakes were apocalyptic. Save the village, or be abandoned to die alone in the ice. The challenge was a gauntlet thrown at Harper's feet, and she grabbed it with both hands. She surveyed the valley, her breath puffing in the frigid air, and spotted a rocky plateau above the flood line, a defensible spot for the new village. It was a half-mile trek through snowdrifts, with no clear path for hauling timber. Harper's heart sank, but her mind was already spinning solutions. She'd built skyscrapers under budget cuts. She could build a village under a death sentence. "We move fast, we move smart," she told Leif, who relayed her words to the villagers. "We'll strip the old longhouses for materials and use sleds to haul them. No time to waste." The first day was a frenzy of planning. Harper sketched a layout in the snow. 5 longhouses in a crescent, sharing walls to save materials and trap heat. She calculated timber needs, 150 logs, minimum, and assigned teams. Gunnar's crew to fell trees, Astrid's to salvage planks from the old settlement, and Leif's to scout the plateau for stone foundations. The villagers, buoyed by the last longhouse's success, threw themselves into the work, their axes ringing like war drums. Harper was everywhere, climbing scaffolds, checking angles, her voice hoarse from shouting orders over the wind. Her Seattle-bred confidence was a beacon, but doubt gnawed at her. 5 days wasn't enough, not with a storm brewing and Ira's influence growing. By day 2, The plateau was a hive of activity. Harper's design was taking shape. Interlocking frames, clay-packed walls, and slope roofs to defy the snow. She taught the Vikings to build sleds from salvaged ship planks, using ropes to drag logs across the ice. It was a trick she'd read about in a history book, Inuit sled techniques, adapted for Viking muscle. The villagers marveled as the sleds glided, cutting transport time in half. Gunnar, the burly carpenter, slapped her back, grinning. "You're no witch, you're a shipwright of the land." Even Astrid, once her skeptic, worked tirelessly, her hands raw from hauling stones. For a fleeting moment, Harper felt like she belonged. But Ira was a storm of her own. On the third day, as the first longhouse's frame rose, she gathered a crowd at the old settlement, her voice rising like a chant. "This woman defies the gods," she cried, pointing to the darkening sky. "Her strange ways will drown us all." Harper, atop a scaffold, overheard Leaf's translation and saw fear ripple through the workers. Some dropped their tools, whispering of frost spirits. Harper's temper flared. She climbed down, marching toward Ira, her boots sinking into the snow. "You want to talk gods?" she snapped, Leaf scrambling to keep up. "Your God sent me here to save you. Look at that longhouse, it stands. You want to survive? Help me, or get out of my way." The crowd held its breath. Ira's eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, a low rumble shook the valley. The ice was shifting, just as Bjorn had warned. A distant crack echoed, and water began seeping into the old settlement's foundations. Panic erupted. Villagers ran, clutching children in furs. Harper seized the moment, her voice cutting through the chaos. "To the plateau. Now! We build, or we die." Her urgency galvanized them. Even Ira's followers grabbed tools, driven by survival. Harper's heart pounded. She'd won this round, but the real enemy was coming. Day 4 brought the storm. It roared in from the sea, a wall of snow and wind that turned the world white. Harper's crew fought through it, lashing beams against gusts that threatened to topple their work. The first 2 longhouses stood, but materials were running low. The old settlement was stripped bare, and the pine grove was nearly depleted. Harper improvised, ordering the men to break apart shipwrecks along the coast for timber. It was a desperate move. Vikings revered their ships, but Bjorn, seeing the floodwater rise, gave his grim approval. "Do what you must," he said, his voice heavy, "but finish it." The final day was a crucible. Harper hadn't slept in 48 hours, her body running on adrenaline and sheer will. Her hands were blistered, her parka torn, but she moved like a general, directing the placement of every beam. The 3rd and 4th longhouses were up, their walls half-packed with clay. The 5th was a skeleton, its frame swaying in the storm. The villagers were exhausted, their faces gaunt, but Harper's chants kept them moving. "One more, for your families." She climbed the 5th longhouse's frame, hammering pegs with a stone, her muscles screaming. Below, Astrid shouted warnings as snow piled higher, threatening to collapse the unfinished structure. Then disaster struck. A gust tore through the plateau, snapping a rope on the 5th longhouse. The frame buckled, beams crashing to the ground. Villagers screamed, scattering as Harper leapt clear, landing hard in the snow. Her heart stopped. Failure meant exile, and the flood was hours away. Ira emerged from the blizzard, her cloak a dark specter. "The gods have spoken," she declared. "She cannot save us." Harper scrambled to her feet, fury overriding fear. "The gods didn't build this, I did," she roared. "And I'm not done." She turned to the villagers, her voice raw but commanding. "We rebuild. Now, who's with me?" Gunnar stepped forward, then Astrid, then Leaf. One by one, the villagers rallied, their fear giving way to defiance. Harper's plan was reckless. Use the fallen beams, reinforce with stones, and lash everything with every rope they had. The storm fought them at every step, wind tearing at their clothes, snow blinding their eyes. Harper's mind was a blur of calculations, load limits, wind shear strength. She screamed orders, her voice barely audible. "Angle the braces, double the ropes." The villagers worked like demons, their hands bleeding, their breaths ragged. As the sun sank, the fifth longhouse stood, its frame lashed tight, its walls packed just enough to hold. The storm raged on, but the crescent of longhouses held firm, a defiant stand against the ice. Harper collapsed against a beam, her body trembling, as the villagers crowded inside. The floodwater roared below, swallowing the old settlement, but the plateau was safe. Bjorn entered, his eyes wide with something close to awe. "You did it," he said through relief. "You saved us." The villagers cheered, their voices shaking the rafters. Harper managed a tired smile, her chest tight with relief and pride. But the victory was bittersweet. As the storm died, Ira approached, her face unreadable. "You think this is the end?" she whispered, her voice low so only Harper could hear. "The Tsongdoi John, the gate that brought you here, waits in the ice. Find it, or you'll never leave." Harper's breath caught. A gate? Was it real, or another of Ira's tricks? Before she could demand answers, Bjorn raised his hand for silence. "Harper," he said, "you are one of us now. But the ice moves again. We need you more than ever." The climax left Harper teetering on the edge of triumph and mystery. She'd saved the village, but at what cost? Her body ached, her mind reeled, and Ira's words burned like a brand. The gate that brought you here. Was it her way home, or a trap to keep her in this frozen world forever? The storm's last echoes faded over the Greenland plateau, leaving a world blanketed in snow and silence. Harper Collins, the Seattle engineer turned Viking savior, stood among the 5 longhouses she'd built in a grueling 5-day race against nature's wrath. The crescent of sturdy structures gleamed under the weak Arctic sun, their walls packed tight with clay and moss, their roofs defying the weight of the snow. The villagers, once skeptical, now crowded around her, their faces alight with gratitude and awe. Bjorn, the grizzled chieftain, raised his axe in salute, his voice booming through Leaf's translation. "Harper, you are no outsider. You are our shield against the ice." The cheers that followed shook the valley, warming Harper's exhausted body. She'd done the impossible, saved a village from a flood that now churned below, swallowing their old homes. But as the crowd chanted her name, Ira's whispered words haunted her. "The Tsongdoi John, the gate that brought you here, waits in the ice." Was it her way home, or a lure to her doom? The question burned, and the answer lay somewhere in the frozen unknown. The celebration that night was a riot of firelight and mead. The villagers packed into the largest longhouse, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy death they'd escaped. Gunnar, the carpenter, pressed a horn of fermented honey into Harper's hands, his grin wide. "To the shipwright of the land," he roared, and the crowd laughed, echoing her cold concrete quip from days before. Astrid, once her fiercest critic, offered a rare nod, her calloused hand brushing Harper's in a gesture of respect. Even Leaf, the young translator, beamed, his eyes bright with hero worship. Harper smiled, her heart swelling, but her mind was elsewhere. Ira hadn't joined the feast. The seer's absence was a splinter in Harper's thoughts, sharp and unsettling. As the fire crackled, Bjorn stood, his presence silencing the room. "Harper," he said, Leaf's voice soft but clear, "you've given us a new home, but the ice moves again. Scouts report cracks in the glaciers to the north, new dangers. We need your mind, your magic." The word hung heavy, a mix of reverence and fear. Harper's stomach twisted. Another challenge? She'd barely survived the last one, her hand still raw, her body aching. But she nodded, her voice steady. "I'm in," she said, earning another cheer. Inside, though, doubt gnawed. She was a hero now, but for how long? And what did Ira know about the gate that could send her back to Seattle, or trap her here forever? The next morning, Harper slipped away from the village, her parka dusted with fresh snow. Ira's words had kept her awake, each syllable a puzzle piece in a mystery she couldn't ignore. The gate waits in the ice. She headed north, toward the glacier fields Bjorn had mentioned, her boots crunching through the frost. The landscape was a labyrinth of jagged ice and shadowed crevasses, beautiful and deadly. Harper's engineers I scanned the terrain, noting the stress fractures in the ice, signs of the shifting glaciers Bjorn feared. But she wasn't here for that. She was chasing a ghost, a shimmer like the one that had torn her from 2025. Deep in the glacier field, she found Ira. The seer stood before a towering wall of ice, its surface unnaturally smooth, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Harper's breath caught. It was the same light she'd seen before her world turned upside down. Ira turned, her hooded eyes locking onto Harper's. "You came," she said, her voice low, almost a purr. "That song Loy John called you, as I knew it would." Harper's heart raced. "What is it?" she demanded, stepping closer. "How do I use it? Can it take me home?" Ira's smile was cryptic, her fingers tracing the ice. "It brought you here, woman of the future. But its price is steep. Only the worthy may pass, and the gods decide who is worthy." Harper's fists clenched. "No riddles, Ira. Tell me." The seer's gaze darkened. "The gate is a test. Step through, and you may return to your time, or be lost forever in the void between worlds. The gods watch you, Harper. They brought you to save us, or to destroy us." Harper's mind reeled. A test. A void? She studied the glowing ice, her engineer's logic screaming for data, for blueprints, for anything to make sense of this impossibility. But there was no manual for time travel, no code to debug. Only a choice. Stay and face the next disaster with the Vikings, or risk everything for a chance to go home. Before she could speak, a tremor shook the ground. The glacier groaned, a deep, primal sound that sent Harper stumbling. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ice wall, the blue light flaring brighter, then dimming. Ira's face paled. "The gate stirs," she whispered. "It senses you. But the ice moves. It will not wait long." Harper's pulse hammered. She could step through now, gamble on the gate, and maybe see Seattle again, her coffee shop, her apartment, her life. Or she could stay, lead the Vikings through the next crisis, and become a legend in a world not her own. The choice was unbearable, and the clock was ticking. A shout broke the tension. Leif appeared, panting, his face flushed. "Harper, the village, cracks in the plateau. Bjorn needs you." Harper's heart sank. Another disaster, another test. She looked back at the ice wall, the blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. Ira's voice was a hiss. "Choose, woman of the future. The gate, or the people who need you." Harper's jaw tightened. She was an engineer, a problem solver. She'd saved them once. She could do it again. But the gate, it was her only way home. She turned to Leif. "Tell Bjorn I'm coming," she said, her voice firm, but her eyes lingering on the ice. As she followed Leif back to the village, the glacier's groan echoed behind her, a promise and a threat. Ira's laughter followed, sharp and knowing. "You'll return," she called. "The gate isn't done with you." Harper stood on the plateau, the village buzzing with fear as cracks snaked through the ground. The Vikings looked to her, their hero, their shield. She'd saved them from the flood, but this new threat, unstable ice, shifting earth, would demand every ounce of her skill. And somewhere in the frozen north, the Tsong Doi John waited, its blue light a siren call. Would she risk it all to find her way home? Or would she stay, forging a legacy in a world 1,000 years from her own? The answers lay in the ice, and the next chapter of her saga was only beginning. Want to know what Harper chooses? Will she brave the gate, or face the glacier's wrath to save her new people? Stay tuned to our channel for the next thrilling installment of Harper's Viking Odyssey. You won't want to miss the secrets that await.